Hi, I'm John Nerrill, and welcome to the Mid-Career GPS podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your career and overwhelmed by what steps to take, I can help you. As an executive and career transition coach, I help my clients prepare, position, and promote who they are and what they do to show up and find a job they love or love the job they have. It's time to start building your mid-career GPS. So let's get started. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the podcast. As mid-career professionals, you're thinking about what's next. Sometimes what is next involves navigating organizational politics, reorganizations, and reductions in force that may leave you wondering sooner than later what's next for you and your career. There is no denying that these events are stressful. They may have been or will be a part of your mid-career GPS. Now, my guest today will share his experiences and career story with us to help you navigate any similar situations you may face on your journey. After 28 years as a highly skilled employee, David Shriner-Cahn was told that his job was over. In spite of the immediate trauma and fear, he knew that as his next step, he'd rather work for himself and have more control over his destiny. That was in 2006. Today, David is a thriving entrepreneur, speaker, and host of two podcasts, Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. He helps high-achieving professionals who have had a late career job loss build their consulting or coaching business so they can do what they love and get paid what they're worth consistently. David, welcome to the Mid-Career GPS podcast.
Thank you so much, John. I'm really honored to be here.
Same here. You have a fascinating story, and I'm really looking forward to digging in with you a little bit of that so our listeners can hear from you and learn from you. So as we get started, David, what did you want to be growing up?
It's a great question. I think I just wanted to be independent and living on my own, to be honest with you. I don't know. When I think back on it, I'm not sure that I had a really specific career path, if that's what you mean. And actually, this is sort of a tangent to that question, which is, I like to think about that question as who do you want to be when you grow up, as opposed to what do you want to do or what do you want to be? Because I think the who is what defines us, and that actually is connected to our character and our values and our beliefs and our behavior, whereas what you actually get paid to produce is I would say it's kind of ancillary to who you are as a human.
Agreed. So much of what we get to do and how we help our clients is really centered so much more on who they are as a professional and the things that they bring to the table in addition to all of their skills. So to really lean in on that is so important. And I thank you for that. David, your career is fascinating and interesting all in the same breath. So for our listeners today, I'd love if you could just give us that kind of quick experience walk, if you will, through your career, especially leading up to the events of 2006.
Sure. So going way back, I studied engineering. I have a master's in chemical engineering from Cornell. I worked as an engineer. I had two jobs. Each one was couple years or so in length, and actually got fired from my second job, which is also an interesting story. It was a month after my second performance review when I got a really strong positive review and I got a nice raise. And then a month later, my boss calls me into his office. He says, "David, I have good news and bad news. Good news is you're doing a great job. The bad news is you don't have a job here anymore."
Oh.
And I'm like, I was young, I was naive. I really didn't pay attention to the fact that the company that I worked for, that had, I don't know, probably 150 engineers or so, had lost a huge amount of business. It was the company had a lot of government contracts, and politics. A different party came into power in Washington, and all of a sudden the money's dried up for the stuff that my company was working on. And about a year later, they ended up firing about half the staff, including me. And the wake up to me was, once I realized what was actually going on, I also was started to look at what was happening in the industry, and I saw that there was a lot of disruption going on in corporate America, and in particular, many of the bigger companies were cutting back on the more senior engineers, many of whom were just a little bit short of being eligible for pensions. In those days, companies had pensions. So they were saving money on salaries and saving money on paying out retirement funds. But these guys that were mostly in their 50s were pretty devastated. And besides the fact that they were probably not going to be able to replace their jobs all that easily, if at all, it was a major financial hit. And I'm looking at that and thinking, this just happened to me. I'm young and I can figure out what I'm going to do next. And I was not high. I was well compensated compared to others in other professions. It was a good job, and I was, earning a decent living, but it wasn't like somebody who's age 55 that has, family that they're feeding, and we didn't have any kids at that point, et cetera. So I was thinking, you know what? I don't know if this corporate America thing is really what I'm cut out for. I wasn't crazy about it to start with. I did okay as an engineer, but honestly, it was like I was not sort of your corporate poster child. And I started doing some soul searching and doing some market research and informational interviews. And that's what led me to go to work in the not-for-profit sector. I realized that I could actually, I had enough skills to be able to get a job handling primarily the operational side of an organization. And I did get a job, and I ended up working in that sector for over 20 years. And I spent whatever time I could taking advantage of learning opportunities, because there were clearly things I didn't know. And I became quite good at management and leadership, especially managing people. And along the way, I always reflected back on that first firing and realized how important it is to always have a plan B that you're ready to act on at any point in time. It's like what I tell people is, you don't want to try to figure out where the exit is when there's a fire. You want to know where the exit is before there's a fire. And the same thing is with careers. We should always be doing scenario planning, and always have multiple scenarios that that we've thought through, and we're willing to pull the trigger on it when we have to, because things happen that we don't have control over. And so I was caught totally unaware in my late 20s when I lost my engineering job. I didn't want that to happen again. And so, with every job subsequent to that, I always had at least one solid plan that I was ready to pursue. And one of the ones that I thought about for a long time is, how do I actually have more control? So if something happens, I have more control over the outcome. And to me, it became clearer to me that path would be entrepreneurship. And over the years, I got exposed to many very successful people in business who were on the boards of the organizations where I'd worked. I started having friends and colleagues who were in business. So I became exposed to that in a way that I wasn't when I was in my 20s. And and I also had hired lots of consultants. So even though I had never run a consulting business, I could see that it was a viable path. And I decided, after I had been in my last job for, it was approaching 17 years. I had just finished an executive education program in not-for-profit management. And I was I was being groomed to become a CEO of another organization. And that would be the linear path. And I was thinking, well, I think what I would really rather do, even though it would be great to be running an organization, I was in a number 2 position at that point. It would be great to be running an organization as the CEO. I saw what happened with CEOs and all the politics they have to deal with the board. And in actual fact, especially, 15, 20 years ago, the tenure of CEOs in not-for-profits was actually very short. Mm-hmm. There was a fair amount of turnover because they were often tasked with being able to produce outcomes that were challenging to produce, and the response from boards was often just to replace them. So I thought, even though it would be a good opportunity, it would be more compensation, et cetera, I thought I just would rather have total control over what I did by running my own business. And so I had thought about that. And then there were some political changes that were going to impact the CEO position in my organization that I saw had the potential to result in duplication of my skill set. So it seemed like it was kind of inevitable that at some point my position was going to be eliminated. Had nothing to do with my performance. It was duplication, and the organization was not going to invest money for 2 people at high compensation when it could do the same with 1. And so I had made the decision that I would become a consultant if and when that happened. And then it did happen. And then I immediately said, okay, I'm now a not-for-profit management consultant, which many people were quite shocked that I decided to do that. They saw that as being very risky, considering, at that point I had, as you said in my intro, several decades of experience. Our family was at a point where expenses were fairly high, and I didn't have any clients. I said I was going to be a consultant, but I didn't have any business yet. So it seemed quite risky compared to just trying to get another job.
So many things there. And I want to thank you for sharing that story and taking us on that walk there. I have to acknowledge that I loved how you just own these events, right? Whether you're fired, it's kind of an awful word, right? But it also, into your point about how we get to take control, there's a lot of ownership and just simply acknowledging, like, anybody who's listening, let's say they've gotten fired for a particular reason, you own that. That's just part of your history. Your job may have been eliminated. It may have been a reduction in force. And from what I'm hearing from you, like these positions that just have happened to you where you've been, your job's been eliminated. I loved what you said a few minutes ago about scenario planning and how, in order for you to have control over your career, that having these different pathways or scenarios for you to pursue really, it sounds like, let you feel as if you were in complete and total control of wherever your career was headed, even if things happened outside of your control.
That is so true, John. And one of the questions I've learned to ask myself, and I ask clients, and anybody listening can ask themselves the same question, is if ... happens, what's the worst thing that is going to be the result? So if you lose your job, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? And you can, for each person, it's going to be different, and is also different for a person at different times in her or his life. But if you can answer that question, then if in fact you do get fired, then you know what you're going to do. Because what's the worst thing that could happen, and what will you do if that comes to fruition?
I love that. Absolutely. And when we think about that, David, you obviously do a lot of work with people who have gone through these kind of events and entertain the idea of going the consultancy or the entrepreneurial route in that regard. What would you say are some of the biggest emotions that people have to address when dealing with a job loss in order to help them move forward?
Trauma, grief, fear, shame. Those are probably the biggest ones. It is a traumatic event. Don't kid yourself. Realize that you're going to feel trauma. Also, especially for high achieving professionals, our self-identity and our self-worth is very tied to our job title and the organization that pays our salary. And suddenly that is going to be gone overnight. So you actually have a loss. It's like losing a loved one. There is a grieving period, and it's going to take time to get through it. Even if you have a plan, like I had a plan, I knew what I wanted to do, it was still traumatic. And I knew that the likelihood of my job being terminated was high. And I had a good relationship with my immediate supervisor who gave me the news, and he was as nice about it as he could be. It was still traumatic, and it still took me time to process it. And it was part of my identity for many years. So yes, there was a grieving process. And frankly, in our society, there is a lot of embarrassment and shame around job loss, even though the reality is, especially for high achievers, it's rarely tied to performance.
It's so true.
And the other thing I want to say is, if you're over the age of 50 in America, you have more than a 50% likelihood that your job is going to be terminated at some point in the rest of your career. So don't be surprised if it happens. And if it does happen, there is likely to be some kind of financial loss to you. So the more you can prepare yourself to mitigate the financial loss, the better off you're going to be, because one of the biggest reasons why businesses fail is lack of cash. So if you go if you want to take the path that I've taken, which is to go from employee to entrepreneur, keep in mind, when you go from employee to employee, your income drops from 100% to zero when your job disappears, or, you may get unemployment or whatever, but most of your income is gone. The day you walk into your new job, your income goes back to 100%. When you start a business, your income does not go from 0 to 100% in one day. If you are lucky, when you start a consulting business, you can match your previous compensation in 2 years. So how are you going to pay your bills for 2 years if your income is not as high as it was? And if you can deal with that, and you have a plan for that, you will actually end up creating a better business, have better clients, because you need space to figure that out.
That is such good advice. And as I'm listening to you, of course, my mind is taking me back to my own events when I left my job back in 2017 or 2016 to open my coaching practice full time. And I remember having that conversation at the bank and being like, get your small business line of credit. If you need it for any reason, you have it. We had done all the financial planning to ensure that the loss of my income, we were going to be able to be fine in looking at that. But we still opened up that line of credit for the business just in the event of. And I remember waiting for that to come through. And then when it did, there was still that lump in my throat being like, do I actually give my resignation? Because to your point, that salary goes from 100% to zero when you leave. And then it definitely takes time to rebuild the business in that regard, or build the business to a point where you can either replace the income or move it forward. So those points are so good, David. Thank you for that.
John, can I mention one thing, actually, speaking of credit?
Yes.
This is actually really important. The time to apply for credit. First of all, it's great to have a line of credit if you have a business. It's great to have a line of credit, whether or not you use it, just to have it there in case, whether you have a business or don't have a business. But the time to apply for credit is when you don't need it.
Yes.
When you do need it, it's going to be much harder to get. The lending institution is going to see that your financial situation is not as strong as it had been, and it will make it harder. So if you are thinking about starting a business, like if you think you may be leaving your job or your job may be terminated, start your business, apply for the line of credit while you still have W-2 income, because it will be easier to get the line of credit.
Amen. Yes, thank you for that. David, let's talk a little bit here about scenario planning, specifically for that person who is either considering either starting a part-time consultancy, starting a part-time business while they're full-time employed, or they've experienced a professional event where they are no longer W-2'd and considering starting their business. Can you walk us through a little bit, or give us some tips about what things people need to consider when they're going solo or going on the entrepreneurial route that might be of interest or help to them?
Yeah. The first thing is, I talked a little bit about the emotions that you go through when you experience job loss. And frankly, even when you leave voluntarily, you're still going to feel some of that. One of my friends and podcast guest, Philip Van Dusen, who had a very high position in I think it was a Fortune 100 company, was so burnt out that for his own physical and mental health, he had to leave. And he left, and he spent a year doing some self-reflection, which was really critical. And he talked about how he had this the identity of being Philip Van Dusen with a big title at a big company and all that goes with it, and then and the prestige, and then the next day he's staring at himself in his home office, and how debilitating that was. And he left on his own. He wasn't pushed out. So keep in mind that the emotional fallout is pretty big. What you need to do is plan for a period of self-reflection. I like to use the word sabbatical, because sabbatical has a positive connotation in our society. Take a sabbatical. And if you need to earn money during your sabbatical period to pay your bills, think of doing something on an interim basis that is not going to be part of your long-term solution, because it will take the pressure off you to figure out the long-term while you're doing the self-reflection, because you need time to do the self-reflection. I would say think about like 6 to 12 months for self-reflection. You can't do it over a weekend.
I just love that. Like, yes, you can't do it over a weekend. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Right? If you spent 20, 25, 30 years working in your field, and suddenly you're trying to figure out how to do something new that's going to excite you, and you'll feel good about, and you'll be well compensated for doing that. You cannot figure that out in a short. It's going to take you time. So what you could do is you could look for an interim position. You can look for something that's on a fractional basis. Maybe you could. And by the way, one of the most common ways to get your first client as a consultant is to approach your previous employer, because they probably still have a need for your skill set. They just weren't able to keep you full time.
Right.
Or even if you have left voluntarily, excuse me, they probably need some of your skills and might be interested in doing so on a consulting basis. So think about, can you fill a certain number of hours per week, pay some of your bills, which will give you the space to do some of this. So the self-reflection. So the self-reflection is really important. That's number one. You need to figure out what it is you love doing the most, what you're most competent at doing, who you want to serve, what it is they need that matches your skills and interests, and what they'll pay for. So even if they need something, if they don't have the capacity to pay for it, or they don't have the willingness to pay for it, then it doesn't make sense to try to pursue it. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to launch a business. You're not, if you're doing something that somebody needs and wants, but they don't want to pay for it, then it's a hobby, right? You're trying to start a business, right? So you need time to like put all those pieces together. And then once you do that, you can try to get some initial clients that will pay you.
When you think on your career, when you think about your career and all that has happened, and whether you consider them highs, lows, peaks, valleys, just whatever has just happened, how important has it been for you to network and make the connections you have along the way?
Networking is everything.
Tell me more.
And honestly, as I think about it, my first 2 clients came from networking. First client was through, it was it was a connection I already have, and then the connection got triggered by a family member.
Okay.
Right. So that was a relationship I already had that led to my first client. And my second client came, I was at a networking event. I had mentioned I was in this executive education program. And so after the program finished, those of us that were in the cohort would meet about once a quarter just to, get together and support one another and schmooze. I was sitting next to one of my colleagues who said, asked me what I'm doing now. I said, well, I'm consulting. And she said, oh, tell me more about that. And I said, well, I'm helping organizations with their, in particular with their operations. That's my skill set in the not-for-profit sector. She said, oh, I think my husband should talk to you. Right. He was the executive director of a sizable community organization. And in fact, that led to an ongoing relationship, a client with an ongoing relationship that lasted several years. And that came because of networking. Frankly, most of my business has come from relationships. And that's true for most consultants. They're going to come from relationships. And so maintaining the right relationships is really critical. And as I said earlier, your relationships with your former employer are also really key. So if you are thinking about leaving or you get pushed out, don't burn the bridges, because those are probably the best bridges you're going to have to get started.
That's great advice. And I can share as well that my first couple of clients as well came through networking. So it's so important.
Yeah. Even if you're angry at your boss for firing you, don't let it show. Just suck it up.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yep.
It's not worth it.
No. David, I've so enjoyed our time today. And as we wrap up, what I'm curious to hear from you is, for anybody who is listening that's, as I like to say, building their mid-career GPS, what advice would you give them to help them build that?
Don't wait to get it right. Just get started. When you see what appear to be breakthroughs that other people have achieved, what you don't see is that breakthroughs happen after hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny steps and pivots. So the first step is not going to get you to a breakthrough. The first step is just the first step. The first step is an opportunity to learn what works and what doesn't work, do more of what works and less of what doesn't. And just keep taking steps. And even if you can't see where the steps are going to lead you, it's important to keep doing them. Like as an example, I started podcasting in 2014. I knew it was important to create content because I knew that was what created visibility and credibility for consultants. But I wasn't sure where the podcast was actually going to lead me. However, I liked making connections with the guests, and I liked discussing the topics, and I liked sharing the content. So I kept doing it. It wasn't always clear to me how the podcast was actually going to benefit my business, yet I kept doing it. And I have been surprised over and over and over again at ways in which being a podcaster has been beneficial to me in the long run in ways that I hadn't expected.
Nice. And absolutely, the consistency and the steps and the resiliency are just pivotal, whether you're working the 9 to 5, you're not working the 9 to 5, you're going the entrepreneurial route. Those steps are so key. And I thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you,
David.
John.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. David, if anybody wants to connect with you, learn more about you, find your podcast, I'm going to turn the mic over to you right now. Tell us where they can connect with you and what, if anything, you have for them to check out.
So first of all, thank you, John. So we have literally hundreds and hundreds of podcast episodes on our site from both podcasts, Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo. We also have a free ebook that you can download on our site with 49 tips. These are very short, actionable tips that you can use to improve your business and your life to help you smash your plateau. We call them 49 tips to help you smash your plateau. So these are 49 nuggets from 49 of our top episodes. And you can download that on our site, smashingtheplateau.com/tips. That's smashingtheplateau.com/tips, TIPS. And you can get all of our material at smashingtheplateau.com. You can go there and there's a contact form to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to speak to anyone who finds the transition, the career transition in mid-career to be challenging, particularly if the person, if you're thinking about going from employee to entrepreneur. There's a lot we could talk about.
Absolutely. All right. I will make sure all of that is linked up in the show notes. My guest today has been David Shriner-Cahn. David, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks, John.
All right. And everyone, just remember, we build our mid-career GPSs one step or 1 mile at a time, and how we show up matters. Make it a great rest of your day. If you enjoyed today's episode and don't want to miss another one, follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you usually listen, and kindly remember to rate and review. Visit johnnarroll.com to download your free job search tracker and other free mid-career GPS resources right there on my homepage so you can start building your mid-career GPS. Come join my private Facebook group at Your Mid-Career GPS and join an amazing community of people like you who are all working to figure out whatever is next for themselves and their careers. And don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn and follow me on social at John Narroll Coaching. I'll see you next time.